Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. And with me today, I have a very dear friend who I literally feel like I just met, but I've known forever. We met in class. I know we met through a class that we did together, and we were put into an accountability pad. And it was one of those where it was like, this was totally meant to be. So I am so honored to welcome Heidi and to be able to share your story of child loss and go through the steps of how you got to where you are now, because you are, I think, in such a different place than when you first lost your child. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I am so excited to be here and be inviting your listeners into our little coffee clutch chat.
I know. And I feel like we just said it before we recorded. We could talk for hours.
Right. And we always go into deep little nooks and crannies. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about you. And I'm sure your listeners can appreciate about you as well.
Thank you. To start off, tell me a little bit about your background and just sort of what led up to getting pregnant and then going from there.
So I actually married into 3 bonus children. And so we had them, obviously they were living with us. And then I got married in 96. So it was 3 years later, almost 4 years later, that I had my one biological daughter.
Okay. And how old were your bonus children at that point?
They were 5, 2, and 1 when I met them, and we got married a year and a half later. So that would be like, how old were they when I had Allison?
Yeah.
She was born in 99. So they would have been 10, 7, and 6.
Oh, so like really good older sibling ages.
Oh my gosh. And they absolutely adored her. Like, I was worried that there would be like jealousy or like feeling like, oh, this is, Heidi's biological.
Right.
But no, they treated her like an absolute princess.
Aww.
And like she ruled the roost. And it wasn't because I made it that way. It was because they wanted to serve her.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So my pregnancy was actually dreamy, like totally easy, natural birth. And no, like I didn't do an epidural or anything like that. Like went into labor at like 1 a.m. and had her at 12:30 the next day afternoon. So it just really, in fact, my OBGYN later said, you should have more babies. You're really good at this. But I did not. She was my only one. Yeah.
So then tell me a little bit more about after she was born. For the most part, was she an easy baby?
She was an easy baby. Like everything was easy. She did not like going to bed at night, but that's pretty normal. I do remember, like I look back now and I wonder if it was a little bit not normal, but thought it was normal. Because she'd have to cry herself to sleep. And like my sister-in-law thought I was just horrible and awful. And I was like, she's okay. Like she's been
everybody has to do what works for
them. So she'd cry for like 20 minutes or whatever sometimes, but then she got it. But you could hear her breathing even in her sleep. And now in hindsight, we know she was diagnosed with a brain tumor 2 weeks before her 3rd birthday. And when they look back at all of the symptoms, because she had been hospitalized with pneumonia 2 times the year before, 2 times just before getting diagnosed, they think that she was born with the tumor. And so there were issues going on. And one thing that she said that absolutely broke my heart after she had brain surgery and they drained the fluid from her brain was, Mom, my head doesn't hurt anymore. What broke my heart was like, she didn't even know what life was without her head hurting. So she had never articulated that.
Right.
And we never knew that. But like, as a mom, I just went, oh my God.
Right. Because she just thought everybody's head feels like this. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I know it's a hard process, but if you can, take me through a little bit about what that was like once you got that diagnosis.
Oh yeah, I'm totally open to talking about anything. It was 20 years ago now for me. So you can
Just
ask
making
away
sure.
and happy to, and I appreciate that. But yeah, open book. Um, it was really tough because, I mean, obviously, I knew, after she'd had pneumonia, like, and been hospitalized so many times, I knew that there was something wrong. And I kept going to the pediatrician because she kept having ear infections. And I kept saying, I know there's some underlying something. He's like, no, 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 this is normal for kids. And kind of blew me off and was like, just get her through the antibiotics and then we'll talk about it. And then I come back, well, she's healthy now. Be like,
Ugh, that is so
like
frustrating.
it was really frustrating. And then I noticed I watched somebody else's kid that was the same age, and I noticed that all of a sudden, like, and it wasn't all of a sudden, it had been progressive, but because I didn't have that contrast,
Mm.
like she wasn't walking the same anymore.
Oh,
Like she
interesting.
was like something was a little off. And so as soon as I did that, I sat down, I was like, oh my gosh, look at that. Her left eye is a little bit droopy. Her left leg is a little bit shorter than her right leg. Her left arm is a little bit shorter than her right.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
so as soon as I saw the one thing, it was like, okay, we're checking everything.
Right.
Took her back in. I was like, look at this. Now watch her walk.
Right.
And she couldn't walk in a straight line. She looked like she was a drunk.
Wow.
So they did he did a CT scan and they could see the hydrocephalus. So that's water on the brain. And they could see right then that she had like 60 cc's of fluid in her brain. And you should have the number of age that you are. So she was three, just about three. You should have 3 cc's. She had 60. And so he actually popped on, my pediatrician actually popped on over while we were getting the CT scan, which is not normal.
Right.
I was like, why are
It's
you
so
here?
funny where your brain goes because I was talking to somebody else on an earlier podcast that you get into this routine of what's normal and what's not. And the second something is off, you're like, I want to know what's going on.
Yeah. And to that point, I had another one of those moments like a couple days later. And so he's like, okay, well, she has hydrocephalus. I said, she has a brain tumor. This is answering everything because the pneumonia too. And he was like, don't know. No, 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 no. I don't think these are related. I think that the pneumonia is one thing and the hydrocephalus, I think this is separate. I'm going to send her in for an MRI. And I was like, no, they're the same. I
Right. You're
know
like, I
it.
can see it with my own eyes.
So fast forward a couple days, go in for the MRI. I took her in alone. And they knocked her out just because she's little, and so they knocked her out to go in for the MRI because you have to be totally still.
Right.
And they talked about the MRI just being like a normal one. They weren't going to do contrast, which contrast is where they put a fluid in so they can see more.
Mm.
And I still remember sitting in there reading a People magazine that was talking about the Winter Olympics and sitting in the room with her and hearing the whir of the MRI machine. And all of a sudden, the tech comes in and it's like, hey, well, I'm going to put in a little bit of contrast because we're going to do more. And I was like, why are you putting in contrast?
Right.
Oh, we just feel like we should and like do a little bit more looking. And I was like, okay. And so he
And those
walked out
little
of the
red
room.
flags are going off.
Oh, yeah. I was like, you are acting way too chipper for doing more investigation.
Yeah.
And so then when he finished up and Allison was still asleep and going into recovery, he was like, okay, well, we're going to take her to recovery. And I said, I know that you cannot tell me anything, but if you were me, would you be calling your spouse right now
Mm.
to say come down? And he
Mm.
said, yeah, I would be.
Wow.
So I sat in the recovery room and we were already slated to go to her neurologist right after that, but his PA came over and Allison was still asleep. And he said, I can't give you the full read because I just don't have that expertise, but do you want to know what we're seeing or do you want to wait? And I said, he's like, do you want to, wait until your husband's here? Do you want to wait until the doctor can share with you? And I was like, no, tell me. And so he was like, yeah, she has a brain tumor and it's in her brainstem. And so I just sat there like, and then he like answered my questions, but then he had to leave. And I just like, my world came crashing down.
Right.
I mean, obviously. And people have asked me, I don't regret having gotten that information early and by myself. I think I actually needed that time to process it in my own way and to have
Right.
those moments with Allison before going over and then seeing Dave. Because I'm always the like, I'm gonna hold it together person. And so if he
Yeah.
had been there, I wouldn't have been able to have those moments.
Yeah. I think it's the same in terms of pregnancy loss too. Most of the time you find out because you're by yourself at the appointment. So most of the time you do find out by yourself what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. And so it's that same connection to say, yeah, you could have waited, but at the same time, you needed that. You needed to know instead of sitting there worrying, instead of sitting there coming up with every possible thing that's going on in your head, to just have the answer right then and there, and then be able to process it.
Well, and to your point, I think sometimes we get scared of hearing the answer, but even hearing the answer, and even when it's the worst case, I mean, because I got the worst case answer that I could have dreamed up, but it was still better to know than
Right.
anticipate for some weird reason.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's the unknown that's so scary. When you know what you're
Yeah.
dealing with, you can also start to formulate a plan.
Yep. Exactly. Like you're empowered. You go from victim to empowered
Yes.
in just having the information, no matter how bad
Yes.
it is.
Yes, that is such a good point. So once you were able to then the three of you were together,
Mm-hmm.
um, did she have to go through surgeries? Was
That
she
night.
wow. So it was
Yeah.
bad enough that they said we need to start.
Yeah. Well, and she had already, because she had had anesthesia in the morning, she hadn't been able to eat since like
Right,
dinner the night before. So then they're like, I said, can we give her something to eat? They're like, no, we're taking her straight to surgery. And so
right,
here, this poor girl has been through the ringer all day, starving.
right.
And we have to send her straight to surgery where they basically just drilled a hole in her head so that they could drain the fluid and release a lot of the pressure because they
Right.
wanted to, and then she was in ICU for like 2 weeks because they were doing that first. And then they wanted to see do another MRI to see how big is the tumor. Was it all tumor or was it some swelling?
Mm,
Um, so she had that. Then I can't remember which came first. Like when you're going through it, it's so vivid and you think that you will always remember every single little thing. 20
mhm.
years later, I'm like, we were there for 2 weeks. I remember she had this surgery, this surgery. I don't remember the
Right. What was the order again?
yeah. And you think that you'll never forget those things.
Right.
But she ended up having brain surgery where they took as much of the brain tumor as they could out, but it was so enmeshed in healthy tissue in her brain stem. And like, you can't mess with the brain stem
No.
because like that's, yeah, breathing.
Right.
It's like
Right.
everything.
Controls the rest of your body.
Yeah. So they got as much as they could out, and the brain tumor had paralyzed her vocal cords. So she was aspirating food, causing the pneumonia.
Oh, interesting. So it
So it
was
was all
100%
related.
connected.
Yep.
Wow.
So they gave
Was
her a
she able to
tracheostomy.
speak?
Yeah. So what they did, it actually, she was able to speak better and breathe better for a really long time
Oh,
until near the end. Because, yeah, tracheostomy, they put a hole in her
right.
throat. And what they did was they gave her, it's a speaking valve, but she called it her talkie. So, like, it was
Aw.
this like purple little button type thing that she could breathe in, but then it would close it when she breathed out so that she could talk.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like with just a little bit of practice on her part of like just playing around with it,
Right.
yeah, she spoke fine. And then near the end, you could tell that she wasn't feeling as well and couldn't breathe as well because she didn't want her talkie on, but she'd still just cover up the valve when she
Oh,
wanted to talk. Yeah.
she sounds like such a precious little kid.
Oh, she was precious. She was also wickedly smart and a little mischievous.
Feisty.
She was definitely feisty.
So
Yeah.
how did you explain it to her? Because obviously she's going in the morning for what she just thought she was going to go to sleep for a while, and then all of a sudden the next thing she knows she's going into surgery. She's in ICU. Like that for a little kid to have to go through all that.
For
What was that like for
yeah.
her? And then for you explaining it to her.
You know, it was very I was very much give her the information she's asking for and nothing more.
Okay.
Because she's 3.
Right.
I mean, she was turning 3 in like 2 weeks, so she wasn't even 3. So it's
Right.
like, okay, we're here. There's something that's going on in your head, and so we're taking care of it. And she
Right.
rolled with it. And she, like, the pictures that I have from her at the hospital. So she's in ICU for 2 weeks. They were so amazing and so flexible with us
Aw.
that, like, where you're only supposed to have one visitor, like, they let everybody in, they let everything in. Like, her bed was covered in toys and stuffed animals. I slept in bed with her every night. I
Oh,
left for
that's
dinner with
amazing.
my girlfriends one night for dinner. The rest of the time I was there 24/7,
That's
like,
amazing.
showered there. Well, there was no way I was going to leave, but
Right.
it's nice that they allowed it.
And to
It's like,
sleep in
wait,
the same bed with her, to have that time with her.
yeah, but, like, she played with stuff. I don't think either of us slept much at 2 weeks. The pictures of the baggy eyes would prove.
Right.
um
Sort of comes with the territory at that point.
yeah, but
And then what
she
about your other bonus kids? Were they really understanding of what was going on?
they were
Okay.
old enough that we pulled them aside, and not with Allison, but
Right.
separately, and we're like, okay, Allison has a brain tumor. We don't know what the future holds, but we're doing our best.
Mhm.
And the doc at that point, the doctor said that she'd grow to be an adult. So
Wow.
told them that. um and just told them, and you guys are always talking about, like, and you guys are just as important, and you guys are just as special, and we may be having to do more, but you know we want to be focused on you guys
Right.
too. And if you ever have questions, come and ask us. And, like, just try to be transparent, again, to the level that they were asking,
Right.
even in their 10, 7, and 6-year-old brains.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, the same thing with losing the pregnancy. My kids also were about the same age. My daughter had just turned 11. My middle boy was going to be 9 that fall, and then my youngest had just turned 5, 6. So yeah, about the same ages. And explaining it to each of them was a different process, because like my youngest kept asking, he would love to come over and kiss my belly, and then I would have to tell him again and again and again for, I felt like, weeks, the baby's not in there anymore, remember?
Yeah. Yeah.
So to explain it to them and what they could understand was really important, and then to try and keep my own emotions to myself while they were processing it, as opposed to putting it on them, what they should be feeling or what they shouldn't be feeling.
I think that that's a really good point. And I think that that's actually something that I really give myself a pat on the back for,
Yeah.
is that my bonus children, I have a relationship with all of them even now, and I'm a grandma. Um,
Oh,
yeah, 5 times over. Um,
that's not passable.
I'm 50, so it is.
Okay. You don't look it.
Oh, thank you. Um, I never, like, it was always about, when talking to them, it was about their emotions, their experience.
Mhm.
They were not my counselors, they were not my sounding board. I never, and I was very intentional about that, of like,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm sad, and I will talk to dad, and I will talk to my friends. Like,
Mhm.
this
My
is about
daughter
you.
said that a lot. My daughter said to me, you can talk to me, and you know that I want to be your best friend. And I said, you are my best friend. However, I don't want to put my emotions on you. I said, I'm here for you, and I totally appreciate that you want to be here for me, and you are in your own special way at 11 years old then, or 12 years old now. I said, you are there for me, and all of your hugs and all of your love I will take anytime. I said, but there are things that I need to talk about with a therapist, or with your father, or with a friend, and not my child. And I said, and maybe as you get to be an adult, you can ask me more questions about that. But right now, your place is as an 11-year-old to understand what your feelings are.
Which is, like, it's perfect and beautiful. And I can tell you, having had conversations with my adult children, that there are a lot of things like that
Mhm.
that we absolutely, or I absolutely did right. And that
Yeah.
was one of them, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, Really quickly, to back up, to answer your question about what Allison thought. So she didn't think much of it. And I didn't realize how much she really, because my whole thing was like, I'm going to treat you as normal as I can. And we're just going to do life. And
Right.
yes, we have to like do suction you out and all that, but whatever, we're going to go on with normal life. I didn't realize how normal she felt until actually the night before she went into a coma. We were sitting and like laying in bed and she had been deteriorating. And she's like, Mom, when am I going to be normal again? When are people going to be able to understand me? When am I going to be able to walk like everybody? Because her brain, there had been no cognitive deterioration. It had been physical.
Right.
So it like broke, number one, it was like, oh, good. She hasn't really had that awareness till now. But that it broke my heart that like, oh, now you have this awareness. But then she went in a coma the next day and never woke up. So it almost was like,
it was almost her way of saying her own goodbye.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How long was she in a coma for then?
Almost exactly 4 months. She went into a coma March 15th because I remember we took her off life support on St. Patrick's Day. So St. Patrick's Day is not the funnest day for me.
No, you get the Ides of March and St. Patrick's Day on either side.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
Right. And then she died July 15th.
Wow.
So exactly 4 months. And we just carried her around and took her everywhere with us. And like she was tube fed through her nose. I did have a pediatrician suggest that we just not feed her and let her go. And I was like,
I can't do that. What happens if she
can't do that? Well, and even for me, it was like, even if she's not going to wake up, like, yes, I would love it if she wakes up, but like pretty much, even if she had, they knew after the first 72 hours, she'd gone without oxygen for 15 minutes.
Wow.
So yeah, she passed out at preschool and they didn't take care of it. So, yeah. So, we knew that even if she woke up, she wouldn't be the same.
Right.
But for me as a mom, and like no judgment on any parent for making a different choice, like we all do what we are feeling called and led to do. But for me, I was like, as a mother, I don't care if she's in a coma and has almost no brain activity. I cannot not feed her.
Right.
Like we took her off life support. No, I'm not going to go to extraordinary measures.
Right.
But I can't starve her.
Right.
And so we would just, she had the tube and we'd take her places and all the time people like, oh, look at that. Sleeping Beauty. She fell asleep working. Or you're like going to the store. I was like,
the fake face that you put on for everybody else.
And then once in a while, somebody would ask. And I was like, oh, don't even, because she'd have her go bag that for the suction. And like, she still had the tracheostomy. And so they'd start asking questions. I'd be like, oh, some things, and like kind of put it on. Like once in a while they dig. I was like, I can share it with you, but
it's
are
really
you ready?
Right.
And they would push and
carry
push
this around.
And so then I would tell them, and then they'd be devastated, like, I tried to tell you.
Right. I mean, I did give you a fair warning.
Yeah.
Oh, so I know you had mentioned, I think this was before we started recording, that you had a celebration of life ceremony for her. In how long was that after she had actually passed away?
A week. I mean, it was like the typical, she died, I want to say like 5 or 6 days later, did the celebration of life. And then we did another one. Like we did the celebration of life like on a Thursday. And then we were really active in our church, which I'm not active at all in now. But we did a Sunday at Sunday school, did things for a different service for the kids where they did a balloon release, which I would not recommend now, knowing that you're sending latex up into the, but this is, 20 years ago.
Right. And back then it was totally acceptable.
Right. So did a balloon release and stuff like that. So we did 2 little very different audience type things.
And were you involved in helping to plan that, or was that something that your brain just could not handle at that point?
Oh no, I did the whole thing.
Oh wow.
I did the whole thing. And I had 4 months of her being in coma. I had 4 months of holding my sleeping daughter, knowing like every night when I put her to bed, dreading going to the bed in the morning. Is she alive or not? And so it was actually, I think for me, a good processing and working through it to plan it.
Yeah. That's it. It just shows how strong you are, because there's so many people in the same situation who would just crumble, because what do? You're sitting there literally watching your child pass away in front of you, and you don't know how long. And it's like the exact flip side. I always say whenever I was pregnant with full-term babies, at the very end, it's like torture for those last few weeks because of the fact that you have no idea when the birthday is. But this is like a whole other level of torture, that you're just sitting there thinking every night, what's going to happen? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to wake up to.
It was, yeah, it was hard. And we brought her little bed because, she had a little toddler bed. We brought it upstairs with us. So it was in the room. So like if I could hear anything, and
Right.
but
Right.
yeah, it wasn't fun. And I didn't go anywhere without her because it was like, I'm not going to have her die not on my watch.
Right.
She's on my watch 24/7.
And especially if she had passed out at the kindergarten and then they didn't take care of her properly, that's like the worst feeling in the world. So now you're sitting here saying, no, she's my child. I will be with her all the time.
Yeah. And her last words were, I want my mom.
Aww.
Because she knew that they basically didn't clear her trach. So
Mm.
like she knew and could feel what was going on, and they weren't taking care of it.
Right. Whereas you would have known right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's hard. So now that you've gone through seriously what every parent's worst nightmare is, you've obviously gotten to a different place now. And it's, I know it's been 20 years, but it's obviously a long process. So tell me a little bit about what helped at the beginning, not just having her celebration of life ceremonies, but the first year or two. What steps did you take for yourself to sit and say, okay, I'm still here and I need to live. I can't die with her, because that doesn't help anything.
Like a bunch of things pop into my mind. So I will say this was even before she died. When she was diagnosed, I had not gone back to college because I had gotten married and all that kind of stuff, but I always knew I was a college graduate. So as soon as she was diagnosed, I said, that's it. I am going back to college and I am getting my degree. I need to have something that is hopeful, that is building towards the future, that is just for me.
That's really beautiful.
So it was like one class at a time, but when we were sitting in chemotherapy every week, I was doing my homework. So that I had something that was, like I said, hopeful for me and forward thinking. So I think that's one thing that I did. And when she died, I did like school. She died in August, and like the term was starting in a couple of weeks. I went with a full load, which was ridiculous. And my GPA was not the same as it was before.
There was just a few things on your mind.
Right. And I did actually ask for an extension on one paper.
Wow.
And that was the hardest thing in the world for me to do, because I felt like I don't want to be using my dead daughter as an excuse. I was like, but it turns out I actually couldn't focus.
Yeah. No, and I think it's so important to know when you need to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even something as simple as just asking for an extension is that help that you needed at that moment.
Well, and to that point, and then we'll circle back to your original question, because I do have a lot of things, but to that point, I just finished up with 3 retreats in one for bereaved parents. And one of the moms said something about, she just moved to this new apartment complex and she didn't know it when they put her in the unit they put her in, but they put her right next to the playground. And she was talking about how much that was bothering her. I said, play the dead kid card.
I need to be moved, please.
And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. I mean, this one, like, don't use it like for random ass reasons, but
that's a legitimate reason.
This is a legitimate reason. It's a true card. It's okay to play it with discretion. And she was like, oh my gosh, thank you for giving me permission to do that.
Right. Because then you don't want to feel guilty about the fact that now, okay, you don't have your child, but you're like, I can't tell the world. I'm not going to sit here and use it as every excuse.
But there are times when it's like,
for sure,
give yourself the grace.
Yes.
And there's no reason, especially in your living space, there's no reason to power through on a daily basis in your sacred space.
Right.
But back to your original question, the things that got me through. Very early on, because my marriage fell apart at the same time. So it was like divorced and now a single woman and grieving mom,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that in this new identity, I did not want to be known as the divorcee. I did not want to be known as the grieving mom.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted those experiences to refine me, not to define me.
I
And
love that.
so I took steps to, like, right or wrong, I didn't read any grief books like the first year
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want to be defined by that. I wanted to grow. And so I did a lot of self-help stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to be more broadly focused. And that's not at all to put judgment on grief. I mean, for some people, that's what they need. For me, I knew that if I read it, I would look at it and go, where am I in the stage? And should I do this? And should I do that? And so I knew for me that that wasn't the healthiest
Right.
just for me. And I think that this, and in all the work that I've done with so many parents, everybody's own belief system is their own belief system.
Mm-hmm.
This one core belief that I have has made it so much easier for me over the last 20 years. And
Mm-hmm.
that is that I really feel like she had her own soul contract coming here, and I had my own soul contract coming here. And together we had our joint soul contract. And that she signed up to be here for her 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
She signed up to go through that experience. She wasn't meant to be here longer.
Mm-hmm.
She was meant to show up for that amount of time and go through that. And how lucky I am that I got to be her mother through that. And how lucky I am for the experience that we had together.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see her friends, or saw, because they're all old now, but when I saw them go to prom for the first time, graduate high school, I didn't look and think, oh, Allison should have been there, because she shouldn't have been.
Mm-hmm.
Because if she should have been, she would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it doesn't make it easier sometimes, but in the long run, it really did make it easier having that
Yeah.
true, like, just soul belief in that.
Right. And what a special experience that you can turn it around and say how lucky you are to have her for 5 years and that she was with you. And in such special ways, the fact that you got to be with her in her hospital bed every night, and the fact that you got to carry her around with you and make sure that she was still living her, even though it was an unconscious life, that she was still living her life with you until the day she died. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then how did you transition into doing what you do now? Because you've created this incredible resource for people who are bereaved parents, and you're starting your own podcast. And there's so many different aspects of what you've done in terms of healing, and not just surviving, but really thriving and continuing to live your life.
So as I alluded to before, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of digging in, and, like, found all these tools for myself. And after a year, I did read one grief book. That was about
It's a
child
decent
loss.
amount.
And I was like, yep, okay. I knew I didn't need to do this. And, like, but about 4 or 5 years after Allison died, like, by that time I had built the exact career that I wanted, had bought a house, had the friends, like, had the life that I really had set out to have for myself. And started, like, I know there's something more that I want to do for parents, and, like, kept coming up with ideas, but nothing was really truly settling in and resonating. I finally, like, let it go and was like, well, if it's supposed to come, it'll come. And then 8 years after she died, I had this, like, total, like, divine download moment where, like, I knew that I was supposed to be doing something, and thought, okay, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And it all, like, it's weird. It felt like it was almost channeled. It was like, okay, this is it. It was channeled, yet it was also channeling what was truly deeply inside me.
Right.
So it was this weird, like,
and because it was 8 years later, obviously that it was something that you had in you, it just wasn't ready to appear yet.
Yes, exactly. And so, like, that's where people say, how did you have that immediate whatever? It's like, well, it wasn't immediate. It was
no, 8 years is quite a while.
And I realized I wanted to take all of the things that had worked for me and put them into something for other parents that were like me, because I was very much an introvert, internal processor. I wasn't going to support groups and all that kind of stuff. So realizing like what I have isn't going to work for everybody, but like for anybody that it resonates with, I would like to deliver that for them. And started doing, and I wanted to do it on a tropical island. That was part of it.
Me.
Right. So I started a nonprofit organization that provides retreats for bereaved parents. And it was on Kauai. And we do week-long retreats. And I basically took all of the things that had worked for me, put them in a curriculum of like honoring the past, living in the moment, embracing the future, and then bringing it all together the final day. And once I developed it, I was like, my degree is in political science. I am not the warm, fuzzy counseling person. So I'm gonna like show this to some psychologists and some social workers and say,
anything else you want to put in there?
or am I totally way off point? Like,
Right.
what should I be taking out? And they all looked at it and they're like, this is perfect. The only thing I would add is adult coloring books. Put that in the beginning so people can like kind of ease into it. I was like, great.
Nice.
So I've added things to the curriculum over the years, but it's pretty much the same curriculum over the last 10 years.
Wow.
And, what I thought was going to be one retreat and like, let's see if anybody comes and what they get out of it. Or are they like, oh my gosh, this was awful. Why did we do this? We've now done, I've led 16 retreats total.
That's amazing.
They've either been couples or singles, or coming out of those retreats, realize, because the whole emphasis is on rediscovering joy and purpose. So we don't have parents come until they're at least 2 years out, because I don't feel like, in my experience anyway, of seeing other parents and knowing where I was at, even if you want to be, you're not really at a place where you can receive the permission to go really embrace joy and purpose again.
Right.
And you need to be at a place where you can receive it and go with it. So with that, some parents came out of it saying part of my purpose is to serve other parents. And so started doing leadership retreats. So for the parents that want to be serving other parents, they go through a 4-day training and learn how to facilitate the retreats. And now they're the ones facilitating the retreats and doing the cooking for the retreats and all that. And I'm the one that is just the mentor and guiding them along and holding space for them while they're doing it. So that's where it's at now. And now I'm actually going into teaching other people how to do heart-centered retreats, because you can basically take the formula. You can take the formula of what I created and put it into any kind of heart-centered thing, because there's definitely key elements that create a kick-ass heart-centered retreat.
Right. And it's so needed, not just in parent bereavement, but in everything. I mean, I feel like I never really understood how important retreats were. My husband and I used to work together before we were married for a group in California that helped with retreats for teenagers. And I never looked at it as anything but they get this really special weekend celebrating their Jewishness and learning things that maybe they didn't know, or they don't celebrate at home, or whatever it might be. And then as an adult, I've been on 2 different retreats, one with my entire family and then one by myself. And I'm like, why are these not available all the time? This needs to be something for people's inner growth or mental health, or like, forget going on vacation. This is what we need.
They are magic and transformative if done right.
Yeah.
Like, it's taking you out of your everyday stuff. It's taking you out of your habits, and you're taking you out of like the people that you feel looking at you and like able to do something different. Yeah. There's total
and
really quick.
Even if you go to something where it's like a hotel situation, you're always still in that same routine. You're in charge of getting the kids up. You're in charge of getting your husband up, or your husband's in charge of getting everybody up. Whatever the situation is, you're not really breaking your routine. You're doing the same things. You're just in someone else's space. Whereas with this, your meals are provided for you. There's activities for you to do. There's stuff that you can concentrate not just on your mental health, but on your heart health. There's various different aspects of yoga and breathing and meditation and things for people that don't like any of those things. Like, it's just such a healthy way to take a vacation.
Well, and the thing is that, and I teach this to my facilitators and will in my course too, is like, yes, it's about the content you're delivering, but 100% what it's really about is actually tapping in. And this is part of why I love it so much. It's tapping into the feminine power of creating and holding space and creating the environment. And the first thing that you need to do, and is always the top priority, is making sure everyone feels safe. And it's like, yes, you're making the individual feel safe, but it's about the collective safety of everybody there.
Right.
And that's something that you can't create unless somebody's holding that container for you and creating that container for you, so that you don't have to worry about creating it for yourself.
Right.
You can actually do the inner work that you've set out to do at any particular retreat.
Yeah. It makes sense that not only have we become close in such a short amount of time, but our other accountability pod person has also become close, because we all talk about really deep stuff. And I think that's what it's about. When you feel safe with people and when you can really just let those walls down, it creates a different connection and a different type of friendship with someone.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think it's so beautiful that you've been able to create this for other parents, and now not only to create it for other parents, but to say, okay, now you're going to teach how to create a retreat. I love that.
Yeah, it's definitely what's lighting me up now, because I really realized it's been the last couple of years, like I can do the grief space thing, like I can get there, but that's not where I'm at anymore. And it's not that I haven't been in a grieving mode for a very long time, but like I have to really, I always have compassion, but to get to that empathetic space, I have to really like, okay, going back 15 years, 20 years, how did I feel? It's like, I can do it. I don't really want to anymore. And yet there's these other parents that are still very much wanting to do that. They've done their healing work. It's not about healing themselves. It's about, showing up for others. And it's been really cool to see, like, once I finally like acknowledge that and create space for others, like, yeah, I wasn't doing it a service to stay there.
Right.
Like, for me to leave that opening, let somebody else step in and take it to a whole other level, because that's what their calling is now. So yeah.
And then you get to continue on your path.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners in terms of how they can reach you? What are you offering now in your retreat course? Anything about when it's starting? I think when you do your mini course, that's like exactly when this podcast will be released. So maybe the one in January, February, you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I am going to do an 8-week course that's going to walk through from like the stages of retreat planning, which it's actually pre-retreat, retreat, post-retreat. No, you're not done when they hug you goodbye. There is stuff, if you want to do it right, there's stuff to follow up. So go through the stages, all that they entail logistically. And there is a lot of that, but like the timelines of what you should be doing and thinking about. But then also in the retreat, how do you hold space for people? Like, how do you do that facilitation? How do you do the group dynamics? How do you develop a curriculum and an program? So for me, when I'm talking about curriculum, I'm talking about like, what are the things that you're offering each day? When I'm talking program, what does that overarching however amount of time, whether it's 1 day or 9 days, like how are you delivering? And then it'll have like accountability, so that you can actually like get your retreat up and going and moving. And a bunch of like templates,
factor.
right? Because yeah, you can take the course, but
yeah. And then you said templates after that.
Yeah, and then templates. And the one thing that I really focus on at the very beginning is that if you've thought of doing a retreat, that means that your inner self is calling you to do it. And don't ever think that you can't because you're not qualified. You don't need certification in retreating or anything like that. You don't need to be an event planner. I was a lobbyist for healthcare policy. I had no event planning experience. I had no certification in anything. I had life experience and knew what worked for me. I didn't have special connections. Like, I didn't have any of that. Right. And yet I planned a 7-day retreat.
Right. And now you have 16 under your belt.
Yeah. And I had 45 people on the waiting list 2 weeks after that first retreat. So Yeah. So it's
It's
all to
one of those,
say,
it like breaks my heart that so many people need something like that, but it's so
um,
special that it exists.
yeah. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and that'll launch in January. I do a weekly little love note to people's inboxes where it's just kind of like what I'm thinking and all of that. So if people want to sign up for that, and then of course, like as I have courses coming up and stuff like that, people can get notified through that list. So that's at Heidi Low, HEIDILOW .com. And then I also have a podcast, Falling Apart or Falling Into Place. So you can follow me there.
I love
And
that title.
thank you.
It really, because like my therapist said something to me. I went to a therapist right after I had the loss, and then I went to his group course. That for me, that was what I needed. And I only went to him, I think, 3 times by myself, but the group course was 7 or 8 weeks, and it was exactly what was necessary for me. But one of the things he said to me in our session, just individually, was everybody has a choice to get bitter or to get better.
Oh, I love that.
Right. And I thought
Yep.
to myself, bitter is not an option. I can't do that. So I always go back to that. And so falling apart or falling into place is like, it's exactly that idea that you have to make the choice. And only you can make that choice as to when you're ready to do that. And you can sit and you can give yourself grace, but you can't wallow.
Well, that's, yeah. And that speaking like, last words, it's so much about how you perceive what's gone on in your life. And
Mm.
you cannot, it's finding that balance of, you can't avoid the pain.
Right.
Like to avoid it, like what is, to resist it, it persists. Like it's so true. Like you have got to go in, you've got to embrace it, you've got to go through it and truly feel it.
And it's going to
But,
suck.
and it's gonna suck, but you are gonna get out the other side. So it's
Right.
like what I'm gonna say next is not about avoiding it all. And it's a perception of where I go back to these experiences are not going to define me. I am not going to be a victim to things that have gone on in my life. I'm going to use them as a catalyst for growth and doing better and being better. And I knew that Allison dying, she wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be honoring to her and her memory for me to always be sad and always be in grief. That's not honoring her life.
Right.
Honoring her life is for me to live my life. I am still here on this earth. I am still on this earth for a reason, and it's to be happy and to be purposeful. So I better damn well do it.
I think that is the perfect way to end, because all of that is spot on and perfect, and I love it. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing about Allison and about your journey and how you got to where you are now. I know sometimes it can be difficult to share the little details that maybe you've forgotten over the years, or maybe you've sort of pushed away and said, I don't want to think about that anymore. So I really, really appreciate the fact that you were open and honest and vulnerable, which is a really hard thing to do.
Well, thank you. It's actually a delight to talk about her and even the hard stuff because I don't get to very much anymore. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with Heidi, we'll have all of her information in the show notes. And other than that, thank you so much for joining us. This was an amazing
Thank
conversation.
you.
And I'm so excited I got to meet you, and I'm so honored that you are here.
Oh my gosh, likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community for those who've experienced pregnancy loss. Remember, you are not alone in your journey, and there is strength within you to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.